Hi, this is the Furry Podcast, and welcome to episode number 1, the first ever attempt at doing live recording. And here with me is the first voluntary test subject, Hal, that's spelled Hal, who is a fellow artist slash illustrator slash comic strip creator that I know from Twitter. And thanks for joining me here on this occasion, Hal. I hope I'm spelling that right.
Oh yeah, no, it's all good. Hello. Thank you for having me. This is very cool. And for I don't know, putting the call out. It's exciting. Yeah.
All right. I would like to kick off this discussion with a big question, which is, do you consider yourself to be a furry?
Okay. That's an interest I've been thinking about this a lot the past year cuz I've for context, I've only been in this space and community for like less than a year at this point. I think in June it'll be 1 year since I made my Twitter account. So I'm very I'm very new to the space, and I guess I consider myself one in the fact that I like drawing animal human characters. And that's like, to me, that fits the definition for it. And I don't know, I'm not as like, I've never been to a con. I don't have any intentions of like getting a suit or anything like that. So I know there's like varying degrees of it, but so yeah, I guess I would consider myself one, but maybe not to the extent that others
Okay,
consider themselves
so
one.
maybe like better way to phrase it would be to say that you are a furry artist, right?
Yes, that's a great way to put it.
So you would say then that you are like a furry artist and you've been a furry artist ever since you said you started your Twitter account, or would you say you even before you made your Twitter account?
Yeah, well, like especially back in high school, I was really into like what is it? Like I don't know, anthropomorphic like Pokemon drawings and that, and I made some like personas and that in high school. And they just sort of like dotted in and out of my sketchbooks for a while. And I had like a big fantasy story that I was working on during most of my college years. And there were a lot of like, I don't know, wolf people, deer people, all that stuff in there. So it's been like present in my practice for a long time, but not to the extent that it has been for the past year. It's kind of taken over most of what I draw.
I should maybe like circle back because we're talking about furries, but before that, maybe we should like try to establish what does the term like mean. So, how would you try to broadly define the term furry?
Um, for me, I think it would. For me, it's as loose of a definition as like people that have an interest or like a passion for, I don't know, anthropomorphic characters. I know that's a really loose definition, but that's how I kind of see it as like somebody looking in, because like I said, I'm kind of new to this, so I've observed a lot of stuff in the past year, and it seems like there's a crazy broad spectrum of people who are like quote unquote in the community, but I don't know, all in different sects, I guess you could say. I don't know.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I'd say it's just anybody who really likes anthropomorphic animals and is willing to like identify themselves with that term.
Okay, let's say, how would you describe like briefly this community to someone who is curious about the subject but doesn't know like anything about it? Like, how do you introduce that concept to someone from like a neutral standpoint?
Well, there's like two different like there's the way I'd explain it to my mom, and then like the way I explain it at parties. So like to my mom, when I described it, I was like, "Oh, like do you remember Animal Crossing?" I'm like, "It's like animal characters, but they're like doing human things." And she was like, "Oh, cool. That sounds sweet." And I was like, "Okay, that works for explaining it to mom because she has no preconceptions about what it is. She hasn't even heard the term." But at a party, like if I'm like, "Oh yeah, I don't know." It's like the meme. It's like the guy in the corner. It's like no one here knows I'm a furry artist on Twitter. So when I explain it to people at parties, usually their first like go to question is like, "Oh, like you do like NSFW work, like not safe for work stuff." And I have to go,
Oh,
"No, I
for
just draw."
real?
Yeah, that's most of the reaction I get. And then I go, "No, I do like a web comic and I just do illustrations." And then I show them my stuff and they're like, "Oh, okay, cool." And they seem to get it pretty quickly because I think most people, at least in like my age group, which is I don't know, 18 to 24, know what a furry is. And so they from what I've experienced, they initially assume like, oh yeah, not safe for work, and then I just go, no, that's not the case, and then they fully understand. So yeah.
The way you like describe it, like people already, when you like introduce yourself to them as being like a furry artist or a person that likes furries, and they already have that like preconceived idea, or they like hold specific like an idea on like what it is, and like you mentioned, it's mostly like the negative stereotypes that you like draw, not safe for work like stuff. But in my experience, I mean, I'm wondering if it's like a regional thing, because for example, where I come from, which is Czech Republic, that's Central Europe, when I like introduce like that concept to my friends or like people in class, most of the times they just like don't know. Like I've genuinely had only one instance where I came across an individual which already had the like preconceived like this negative stereotypical notion about furries, but you know, after like a brief conversation I also like managed to overturn that. But in your case, it's interesting that you are saying it happens to you more often, that you actually come across those people who have those like negative views, and it just makes me wonder if it's like a thing that is like specific to like North America, or specifically you come from Canada, right?
I think it probably is, because I've also like I've grown up on the internet, and I've been like an art kid for like since I was in elementary school basically. So I'm already kind of in the social spheres that know about this stuff. Like I'm sure if I went to, I don't know, like a sports bar or something, there would be a lot more people that would need like a full explanation. But also there was like that weird culture war like thing that blew up last year where, I don't know, in the States they're like, oh, these kids they're calling themselves furries and they need litter boxes in the schools. And that was like a news story and like a talking point for a while. And so I think, like, I don't know, I think those kinds of things those carry more weight than like internet people that know about it. So it's hard for me to say exactly what, but I think it's just because of the social spheres I'm in that I don't have to explain it as much as I normally would. Going back to what you said earlier, I wouldn't even like consider it like a negative connotation that people have with it. It's just, it seems that like what most people assume is like instantly goes to like the sexual aspect of it, you know? Like I think that's because it's, I don't know, it's
There,
to,
but no, there's actually I think a reason for it, because when I like, there are like certain like videos that I like know from YouTube that like, you know, talk about the furry community, or like talk about the things that they like do, or like, or certain events from like a perspective of someone, you know, who is not in the community. And I remember there are like few videos.
the internet historian one.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly the video that's I think like very like detrimental to like the not positive aspect, or the not positive view that people have on the community. Like it contributed to that a lot.
That video is just, I mean, it's an interesting story. Like
Yeah,
it's
it
a
is
really
interesting. It's
riveting
also
story.
real. Like I'm not like denying that it's not like a real thing, and I'm also not saying it's like a hate thing. Like it's like going against the community. It's just like a documentation, basically, of a real life event that happened, and it's such like interesting and also kind of entertaining story that is also like not surprising that it's so popular, and that it also like contributed so much to like this specific view of the community that people like have on the internet.
Hmm. And I find another interesting stereotype that, because I don't like, because I know that there's like a big sexual aspect to like the furry community, and that's like, hell yeah, go for what you want. Like I don't really have many thoughts on it, but the thing that actually really irks me is this sort of stereotype that it's like, oh, you just like enter the furry community, you do furry commissions, and you get loaded, and it's like, I've heard that a lot. It's like people, and it's kind of insulting. It's really insulting because it's like, no, this is just from my experience, like a group of people that really love these characters they have. They mean a lot to them. And people find enjoyment in like commissioning art of them. They're not like these people who are just like, oh, I'll buy anything and that sort of thing. And they're like just shelling out all this money. It's like, no, these are things that have actual value to people. And there's like hard work that goes into them. and it's like a really positive, cool exchange, and a lot of people make like honest livings off of it. And that stereotype, I think, irks me more than anything, because it's just kind of belittling, and it turns the community into this like conglomerate that just like almost it from what I've heard, it's like, oh, they just buy and buy and buy, and it's like, no, that's not the case. It's like there's actual like value to this stuff. So I don't know, that was kind of a winding point, but it's yeah, I find that one irks me more than anything else.
I'm slightly confused about that stereotype. You said that it almost sounds like you describe NFTs to me.
Yeah, it's like it seems talked about, like when I've heard that brought up, it feels talked about with like the same tone, where it's like, oh, it's just like a get rich quick scheme. Like you just go and it's like, oh, I'll just go like make furry art and that sort of thing. I heard that like all through art school, where it's like, oh, I give up, like I'm just gonna go make like furry art, and like as a joke. And like admittedly at the time, because I wasn't in the community, I would like chuckle at that sort of thing. It's like, oh, like this is too difficult, I'm gonna go do this. And then when I actually like entered the community, is like, no, this is like, there's like high tier. It's so much more than like people jokingly give it credit for. And I know that like that stereotype is really not that harmful, and it's almost more playful than anything. But that just kind of irks me as like, I don't know. It feels insulting. I don't know how
Yeah.
else to put
Yeah,
it.
no, I know I exactly know what you're talking about. I was slightly confused, but yeah, I also like heard that like people just, jokingly saying, "Oh, yeah, I'm gonna start doing furry art because this thing that I'm doing is not working out." And there's that idea that furry artists like get paid a lot of money for their work, which definitely is like real in some instances. There are some artists who are like, I guess, popular and do like specific type of content that is desirable to like specific audience, but it's like a specific audience from within that community, and it does not at all like define the community as a whole. Like for a lot of people, there isn't like any monetary motivation to be in this community. They are in here because they enjoy the like whole idea, the whole concept of anthropomorphic animal characters, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that actually brings me maybe to a question. You're an artist too. Like I mentioned previously, you're an artist, you're illustrator, and you make comics. And I'd like to ask you, like, what is your like personal appeal or motivation to draw furry characters instead of like regular human characters? Like, why do you do it, and like why do you like it so much?
Well, it started out as, I think it starts out as I assume it starts out for most people, where you like draw a cool character. And you're like, oh yeah, like that's me if I was I had a bat character in high school, and he looked so freaking cool, and he had like the ripped pants I wanted. God, he was awesome. And so that's like where it started. And then, oh, that's how my like Twitter account started, because I would just draw these little doodles of like myself as like a little dog or something. And then my friend was like, yo, you should make a Twitter account and like start posting these. I'm like, okay, yeah, sounds good. And that's how it like kicked in. And I've been thinking more about it in the months since, because it wasn't like a conscious choice. There was no decision like, oh, I'm going to start posting here and this will become my main thing. So it kind of like overtook the human art I draw, because for basically all of college and before that, I was just drawing like people, like human beings and that. And I find that I don't even know what single thing it means to me, because it's way more fun. I find you can have way more fun with the character designs, like from a creating standpoint.
Yeah.
It's a bit more cartoonish, and I love cartooning. I used to be very adverse to the term, because it sounds like when you're drawing and somebody's like, oh, you doodle. It's like, no, I don't doodle. I draw. It's like,
Yeah.
you get all kind of high and mighty about it. But like cartooning it's fun. It has the capability to be very lowbrow and extremely highbrow. Like the range is incredible with it. So what I'm trying to say is there's no single one answer. I find it suits a lot of things. And I have a story that I was working on for quite a while about like a bunch of people who get trapped up in the Arctic in like an 1800s expedition. And now I'm looking at it through the lens of anthropomorphic characters. And I'm realizing that having anthropomorphic characters in place of these human beings could actually add a lot to like the metaphor of the story and like bump up their personalities a bit. And I could have some really interesting like parallels with, I don't know, like species eating each other or like survival and that sort of thing. So there's multiple reasons I think for it, but I think at the end of the day, it's like I just like how animal people look. They're really fun to draw, and I like drawing things that are fun to draw. So yeah.
Yeah, it makes sense. I agree with that. So for you mostly then you would say there's like a big appeal like from an artistic and like a storytelling perspective, like the way you can just enhance a character, you can like give him like some like extra traits, you can make him look, how to say it? You can just like express way more through animal people, because since those people are based on like animal and there are different like many different animal species, then there's like a very like the opportunity to make a unique expressive character expands on a really large scale. And those characters, you know, you can base their like appearance, you can specifically like assign certain species to a character, which will then like give them like a symbolic meaning or give them like specific character trait that is like associated with a character. So for example, you can make the character look like a fox, and obviously there's like this saying that foxes are sly, so that character, you know, could like obtain that feature, and it's like it could be like obvious to the reader or the observer, and that's pretty much how you spice up the character design, right?
Totally. And uh, I guess like this one's the easiest for me to explain because I don't know, my character, whatever, I think he's a coyote. I don't know. It's like some sort of dog thing. But coyote's a great example for like one of the stories I kind of want to tell in the future about like the Canadian suburbs, because they're everywhere around the Canadian suburbs. And I mean all the way down to LA. There are coyotes everywhere. So they're like, as somebody who's grown up in the suburbs, it's like you're in this weird displaced spot. It's your natural habitat because it's all you've ever known, but you still have this like desire to roam and this desire to stir shit up a little bit because you're like a troublemaking kid. And then people get mad about it when you're doing it in like a neighborhood, but it's like, well, where else am I supposed to go? It's like, what do you mean? Like, why are you so upset about the coyote eating pets? It's like, where else is it supposed to get its food from? It's like, this is its environment now that's been created. And so using it like in a more metaphorical way like that, I find is where I'm really intrigued by it. So yeah, I feel like it, like you said, it can really just bump up a character and you have so much more, there's so many more perceptions around an animal. Like people see animals and they instantly kind of have an idea of what their personality is like, whether that's right or wrong. So you can also play with that. So yeah, I find it's got a lot of benefits for character design and storytelling.
Yeah, but it's also not like a necessary part of like character design to assign animals or like animal species to a character just because these animal species like hold a certain like symbolic or
Like a preconception about them or
yeah,
an assumption.
exactly, like it's not a necessary thing. I think that should be like expressed, and it should be mentioned that this isn't like a rule, this isn't like a
Mm-hmm.
thing, like it's a thing that you can do, it's a thing that a lot of artists do, but it's not something that you have to like, it's not a rule that you have to follow. And
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the times like people don't do it, right? People just like mostly they choose how are they going to base their character, not on like the what type of animal it is, but they're going to make the choice on like what they just like find simply like more like attractive or like beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And that's the great part, is that you have, there's so many different ways to go about it. So like my explanation for the coyote thing, that only came around like after I had been drawing my character for a long time. And I was like, oh, it's got this connection that I could use in like a future story or something like that. It wasn't like, oh, I will draw myself as X because of Y and Z. it just sort of, it was something I'd thought about afterwards. And it's like, yeah, people like, I don't know, if you like beavers a lot and you think beavers are the coolest thing ever, which they are, beavers are awesome, then you're probably going to give yourself like a beaver character, which is cool. And there shouldn't be, like, you don't need any more explanation than that. But I'm sure you could go into some cool explanations if you wanted to, like, either lean in, if you're looking at it from a writing perspective, because I think I'm looking at it from more of like a comic storytelling angle than people drawing characters that they really like, that they feel like a connection to and they feel represented by. And that's very different than, I don't know, like writing a story with certain things in mind and you're using characters for certain reasons. So I think it's like, yeah, I think it's two different sides of the coin, you know? So I don't like, well, I'm just looking at the podcast cover, so I'm thinking about rabbits. And I don't know, you could have like on one hand, it's like you see a rabbit and you're like, oh, it's very jumpy, it's scared, it hides and it runs and it's constantly like, I don't know, it's a very skittish creature. Or you could look at it like, oh no, it's like an excellent survivor. It's super dexterous, like they're clever enough to stay alive in pretty dangerous situations. So people's conceptions of like, oh, a scared rabbit can be like flipped on their head or that sort of thing. So I just think that stuff's really fun to think about when writing stories that, or making stories that don't just have anthropomorphic animals for no reason. Like the last thing I'd ever want to do is like, I have a story and I'm like, oh, I'll just make them anthropomorphic animals so they appeal to like a certain demographic. Like I want there to be a reason they are represented that way, you know? I don't know if that made much sense.
No, it made complete sense. I'm just okay. You said you have a coyote character, and that coyote character is basically, is it supposed to be like you? Is it like your representation of yourself?
Yeah, so I think just the character of Hal, because Hal is a nickname too. That's like not my real name, but it started out, I'm gonna be honest, as like therapy. Like it allowed me to work through these weird melancholic feelings I was having about my life at the time by taking this character and having it represent me and sort of, I don't know, drawing scenarios or situations that reflect my like internal thoughts. And it's easier to do that for me, at least, when it's like, no, this isn't me, like who I am physically. It's this representation and there's a nickname and it removes that. Cause like I'm pretty anxious. So I get I double think things a lot, or I second guess things a lot. And if I give myself that barrier of like, no, it's a nickname and it's a character, then it kind of removes all my fear about like, oh, what would people think if I'm like drawing myself in these situations, you know? I don't know if
Oh.
that's a great explanation of
Oh,
it, but
okay, yeah. I that's
it's,
actually a pretty good explanation. It's pretty much a reflection, but it's not like a direct reflection.
yeah, like recently I've been drawing a bit more art kind of reflective of like the suburbs, and I don't know, because I'm feeling very particularly nostalgic at this point in time for whatever reason. I think I always feel that when like summer starts to kick in again. But I've been reflecting a lot on it, and so I'm able to like draw my teenage experiences that at the time were quite depressing and not the best, but I can kind of work through it by drawing characters in those situations that I feel represent things. And going back to what I said about how I like having reasons to make characters anthropomorphic, I have, I don't know, like the fauna of the Canadian suburbs. So I'm able to like pull from familiar things, and it's like, no, these are like wildlife in this setting. And I don't know, putting those layers and those barriers between you and the subject matter, it's like when you feel a bit it feels a bit self-indulgent to paint a self-portrait. You're like, it can, I don't know, I can feel a bit like that. I'm like, oh, why, this seems weird and like egotistical. But if I'm putting a different name on it or a different figure on it and putting up those barriers, I remove all that anxiety. I'm like, nope, I can explore this fully without any concerns or worries, you know?
No, I get completely what you mean. But it's like that's actually like a very deep subject, that when you create a character that's supposed to like represent you, it is like essentially like somewhat at a core reflection of yourself. But since it's not exactly you and there are those barriers, it like allows you to like explore like many things about yourself and like about the world, and it gives you the opportunity to just like view the world like in a completely like different light, and it can help you like figure out some stuff. It just like removes an anxiety from the situation, and like in other instances like it helps to people just like to rediscover themselves and like realize like what is their like sexuality, or like what's the things with like gender identity. But I'm not sure if I want to like dive into that topic right here, because it's like a
That's
deep
like a
subject.
whole episode. That's
Yeah,
a whole other side of
exactly.
it that we haven't even talked about. Yeah. Well, for I to quickly like dip my toes into it, it helped me a lot with that. Like genuinely, like that was part of the stuff I was working through, and I found it was very easy to explore and think about those things through that lens of like an anthropomorphic animal. So that was definitely a part of it, and I can totally see why it's so it's so vital for that process sometimes, and it can really help people out with it. And yeah, I don't know. I totally agree. I totally agree.
Yeah. Like, by the way, how do you feel about this, like, what should we call it, interview? It's not really an interview, is it? It's
It's
just
more
like a,
just like a podcast. It just feels like we're talking about it.
you feel it's going well?
Yeah, I think so. I haven't heard
All right.
myself speak yet, so I don't know about that part.
I
Yeah, I
mean,
think it's going well.
I think you sound great, and you're able to keep up the thoughts and the conversation going.
Sweet. Yeah, I mean this is fun. I just like talking about this stuff, you know. It because I don't really talk to my roommates about it or anything. I do lightly, but I
Oh,
guess for lack of a
you have
better term,
roommates.
pardon me.
You have roommates. You live like
Yeah,
in a, like, you're sharing an apartment with someone?
dude, I live with four other people. Yeah, we're
For
packed in
other
here.
people.
No, but they're all, I mean, they're all quote unquote normies, I guess you could say, in like
Yeah.
the most loving way possible. I love them dearly. They're all my dear friends, but I'm going to call them that behind their back. Um, but
Until they see this podcast, of course.
oh yes, yes. But I find that explaining to them and that sort of thing,
Is it something that you feel like is like a hard to have a conversation about it with someone if they're like not specifically very much invested in this subject?
yes, exactly. That's exactly it. So yeah, because it has to do with my anxiety and that sort of thing, like being perceived. Because I only recently, at least on my Instagram, have I started to merge like my old art and like the people I follow there and my art school friends. Only recently have I started to merge that with this online following and community I'm a part of. And for a long time I had like a lot of fear about that, because like I was like, oh, how will like people take this? Because all that people ever ask me is like, oh, do you draw like not safe for work stuff when I bring it up? So I'm like, no, I want people to know that it's like, no, I'm doing like the same old stuff. It's just they're like animal characters, and I get very in my own head about it. And for a while, it was hard to tell my roommates. Obviously, I told them right away when I was like, yo, guys, like people like my animal art. This is really cool. And so they knew about that for a long time, but I haven't really discussed the ins and outs of it too deeply. So this is great. I just, yeah, it's nice talking about it because I think it's such an interesting community, and people's perception of any community is always like the more extreme sides, you know? So
Yeah.
it's like how people kind of cringe at Rick and Morty because they're like, oh, aren't all those fans like weirdos? And it's like, no, there's maybe like 15 weirdos, but everyone else is like pretty dang normal. And so it's like, oh, do all furries like draw crazy, not safe for work stuff? It's like, no, they're like, there's a group of people that do that. God bless them. And there's a lot of other stuff. There's musicians. There's like fursuiters, there's artists, there's a whole range of stuff. And it's like, we got furries in the Air Force. It's like they're flying the jet planes. It's like we're everywhere, man. And so the fear of getting people over that barrier and through that understanding is the part that I get freaked out by, because I just have anxiety. So yeah, it's nice talking about it in this environment where I don't have to explain to you like, no, it's not this, it's not this, it's this.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know?
yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah, I get that. Yeah, I also appreciate the opportunity to like have a conversation with this about someone, because it is like it's just the whole like whole community, the whole concept. It's like very hard to just summarize it and just to like, label it in like a simple way. And there's like just lots of stuff going on around. And
Mm-hmm.
kind of with like the term furry, I used to like to compare it to a term sports fan, which is also like a very
Mm.
broad term. Like sports fan is like a person, that likes sports, but that's it. That's is as far as the definition goes. And
Yeah.
there are many different sports fans. There's like a sports fan that likes watching football on like Tuesday nights and drinking beer while watching, and there are sports fans who like jogging in their like free time, or like playing tennis competitively. And they're all
Mm-hmm.
essentially like sports fans. They all fall under the same umbrella term, but in the end they're not all like friends. They do not relate to each other, because it's obviously like a very broad term.
Mm-hmm.
But everybody understands that a sports fan is like a very broad, very undefining term. But contrast to that, I feel like with the furry community, the people that already know about this community, already have an idea about this community, have like a specific like idea, like you mentioned. They're like these like extreme example associated with it, and like people like focus on that, on these very specific examples, and they fail to see that it's actually also a pretty broad term, because universally what brings all furries together is like the appeal for anthropomorphic animal characters. But that's really it.
Mm-hmm.
And like the individual interests start to branch out. Like some people, well, I think it's safe to say that a majority of people like the art, but not everyone is in here specifically for the art. Some people like, they like the events, they like cons. And
Mm-hmm.
there are also people who like, it's true that there are also people that are here specifically for the needs of not safe for work art. Like, I'm not going to deny that, but it's not like the majority. It's just like
Mm-hmm.
it's like the small part of the bigger piece. And like everyone from within the community has their like own like specific reason why they are in here, or they have their own like appeals, their own little interests. And not everyone that is a furry is necessarily like a friend of all the other furries. Like, before I joined the community, I also had like this kind of like narrow idea on what the community is and what it
Mm-hmm.
represents. And I would like say that broadly, like I thought that a furry pretty much is like almost all of the times a fursuiter. I'm
I
not sure if
think that's the big one, you know?
yeah,
It's like people are like, "Oh, you dress up." And it's
yeah,
like, "Dude, I can't even afford to." It's like, "Do you know how much those things are?" It's like people have to work their asses off to get those
yeah,
things. I wish we could all afford those. That would be sick. But yeah, that's a big one. That's even bigger than the not safe for work thing, which is like you said, it's a part of the community. Power to them. God bless them. Some of those artists are absolutely fantastic at what they do. Um, but the fursuiting, I think, is the big one because that's the visual part of it. You see
yeah,
people at the conventions, and that's like I think that also plays into the like online perception of it because you have like furry cringe compilation number 62, and it's like, look at these people in fursuits doing things that aren't even that, like, they're not weird or anything, they're just in a suit, so it's easier to make fun of them, like that kind of that kind
yeah,
of cringe compilation, for lack of a better term. I think that's the biggest perception of them, is like, yeah, because it's so visible, but you don't see people that just like the art because they're not in a suit, you know.
yeah. That's true. I also shared like this kind of like narrow perception of this community, and also like I had this like kind of a strange, maybe a little bit a naive idea that like like all furries are like friends with each other, but
Mm,
that's not true because the community is so vast, and you're not. I'm not going to be a friend with another furry just because of the sake of them being a furry. Also, because furries are in the end, just people, and the furry community is a group of people, and every person is different, and you don't vibe with every person, right? You just like you find your own like friends from within the collective. You find your own like groups that you vibe with, but you don't necessarily are like you don't just like vibe with like all of them. But I believe that what the community stands for is like ultimately like a good thing. Like at a core, it's something that I like question myself a lot of times, and I feel like there's like lots of like good lying from within the community. Like there's like lots of like good things,
mhm.
concepts, ideas lying in here, and for that I want to like support this community. I want to like shed like a good light on the people. I want to like you know I want to like represent it in a in the light that it deserves to be represented. But of course, that doesn't mean that I like love all of them and that I love all of the furry individuals and I'm like friends with every furry, because I have my like specific sets of interests from within the community, and that's fine by me. Like I don't have to be a fursuiter. I don't have to be a con goer. I don't have to be a wild person with an alternative lifestyle. I can just be myself and enjoy those specific aspects that I have in here, which is mostly the art basically. And I think for you that is also like the same case pretty much.
Oh yeah, I'd say so. I'd say so.
I'm gonna ask you, have you actually been to a con?
No, I have not. Um, I want to go, I think. I don't know. They look like fun, but I also don't like big crowds.
Yeah,
And
I understand.
if I was going to go there, I'd probably try and like set up as an artist or something. And so that's something I just need to work towards in like my professional like pursuits. I
Oh,
just need to work my way up to that. I would like to go. I know there's one near me that happens sometime over the summer, so I may drive up this year and do that. Just check it out. But I haven't put a whole lot of thought into it because conventions to start are not really my cup of tea necessarily.
yeah, I get that. I somewhat like relate to this, but I did attend a con twice basically. It wasn't like a large con, it was like a smaller con of like 100 people, and it
Okay.
took place in like this countryside like uh resort.
That sounds
It
awesome.
was like a like a cowboy western like inspired resort.
Oh, fuck
And
yeah.
yeah, it was pretty cool, and it was like very chill, and it wasn't like the conventional like the con that a lot of people are familiar with,
Mm,
which takes like place in a hotel and there's like a thousands of attendees. So
hmm.
it was definitely like a more easy experience for me. And
Totally.
I'm not like a big con enthusiast, let's say, but I would definitely say that it was like a positive experience that I very much did enjoy. And so I can definitely like recommend, if it's something that you are curious about, then definitely I do like encourage you to at least check it out. Just
Yeah, I like the idea of going to a place that's a bit more where it's yeah, not a thousands of people in a single hotel and that sort of thing because that sounds really nice. Yeah, that'd be cool. I need to find me a Western themed furry meetup. I'm in Western Canada, so that should be pretty easy. We're like obsessed with cowboys over here. So I'm
really.
surprised. Oh God, yeah, it's cartoonish, but I'm surprised that you know what? It probably does exist, and I just haven't found it. I guarantee you, it exists over here. A cowboy furry meetup.
uh I don't know, actually. I feel like, well, I know, I just feel like the con that I attended specifically is actually like very not unusual, but well, the thing about like North America in general is that it's like it's a large country, and like everything is like very far apart, and
Yeah.
everything's just very vast. And like for a con organizer, it's way more like convenient and practical to organize a convention that takes, place in like a hotel that can host a lot of attendees, because
Good
people
point.
from all over the country, can just, they want to, take part in these cons. And but there's a lot of them, so you want to bring a lot of
Yeah.
people to a single place, so it makes the most sense to, for that con to happen in like in some, I don't know, in some hotel Hilton somewhere that can, host a lot of people, and so everybody can join and everybody can, just be a part of this community. And with those like niche, smaller, like 100 attendee cons, it's probably like more of a it's more of a thing in Europe, I think.
That's actually, I hadn't even considered that. Like, to the next major city, it's a 3-hour drive from where I am, and I'm like in a major city, like Canada, way, but especially more than like the States, because at least they've got a bunch of major cities. We've got like 5 cities, and I think it's something crazy like 50% of the Canadian population lives below the line that the border is drawn on, because like Toronto happens to
Oh
fall beyond.
yeah,
It's
Toronto,
like
and yeah.
Canada especially is so, you put it right, it's just vast, and there's not a lot of people here. So yeah, that actually makes a lot more sense, that it's like you get everybody together in one big place, because it's easier to congregate than everybody's traveling for these little things. Like, I'm sure they exist, but they're just a lot harder to find.
Yeah. Actually, do you know any like local free people, would you say?
I mean, I was in art university, so I've kind of I kind of known them. There's a ton of, like, there's a big crossover, at least at like the school I went to, and like in high school and that.
Mm-hmm.
So I've known people that I've identified as that for a long time. So I've had like a
Oh,
peripheral knowledge of it, but I've never like seeked out uh furries or furry communities, you know.
and how many people in that college did you like know that are like these in specific individuals, furry individuals, let's say?
You know, like, well, that's when we get into the definition thing again, cuz it's like uh it's one thing to like draw animal people, I think, and then I think the big part of being in the furry community is accepting the label or embracing the label. So people that
Oh,
willingly embrace the label, probably like 4 or 5 in my like graduating year, but people that
oh,
like to draw animals, way more than that, like anthropomorphic animals. So
oh, okay.
yeah.
Yeah. That's actually a really good thing that you brought up with like the term, because it really is just a label, and not, like you said, like not everyone is comfortable with like giving that label to myself.
Hmm.
And so I also like know like few people that like do, like technically could say they like do furry art, yet for some reason they're like very like hesitant to call themselves furries, and I just kind of like wonder like where is that hesitation stemming from. And it probably just is circling back to what we talked previously, is that like some, it's that like negative, or that like specific stigma that is above the community, let's say.
Hmm. Well,
And
that's like, yeah, that was my case. Like, I didn't, only recently have I gone like, yeah, I'm a furry. Like, why not? Like, fuck it. Call me that. I accept that fully. But for a while it was like, yeah, being afraid of the negative stigma for not really good reasons. So I can personally attest to at least that being part of it, you know?
when I think about it right now, it's kind of like the term furry, it's like a valid label only like from within the community. I'm not sure if I'm like getting my point across. What I'm trying to say is that it only makes sense to call yourself a furry like in the furry community basically, but from outside the community, like a lot of the times like people either like have like these not exactly accurate associations about this term, or they just like don't know anything about it, and so at this point it just kind of like somewhat becomes pointless to use that label, from outside the community,
Mm.
because people don't know what it really is. And
Mm-hmm.
if they don't know what it is, then you have to explain it to them, right? So you just like say, oh, it's a shared fondness towards anthropomorphic animal characters. And then, they're going to further ask you like, oh, what does anthropomorphic means? So you go into this like lengthy explanation just, to get the point across that you are a furry. And so like a lot of times I was just like questioning myself if it like makes sense to, just if it makes sense to use that label, and if it wouldn't be like more convenient to just say that I am like an anthropomorphic animal enjoyer.
Yeah.
I didn't see like much point in like using the label furry from outside the community, but at the
Mm.
same time it makes sense that it's like hard to introduce or like to explain to someone, because it's a niche. It's still like a niche thing. It's still something that not everybody's going to be familiar with, and that's just the reality of the situation. Like, if you want people to like know about this thing, then you have to actually use that label and then explain what it means.
Mm-hmm.
But I was like thinking about, it reminds me of like I'm not very like familiar. I'm not very familiar with like the origins of the furry like community, but I know that there was like a certain situation where the community essentially kind of like tried to split itself apart. There was this instance
Oh, the
when
burned
like,
furs.
yes, exactly. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Like the people were like somewhat fed up with the like negative image that the community like started to
Mm-hmm.
obtain, and wanted to like split apart, and they started
Yeah.
calling themselves the Burn Furs. But in the end, it didn't really like solve the issue. It didn't do
No.
anything. And in this case, it just like, I'm recalling back to it because I was just kind of thinking about a long time ago. I was thinking about if there's like a way better, like a term to use to like describe this community without using the word furry, which already, holds like certain like ideas and aspects to it that I think are maybe not completely representative.
Mm-hmm.
But in the end, as in the end, it probably doesn't really make sense because of the example of the burn furs. Like there is like no point in trying to do that. And so you just kind of have to, instead of trying to like split apart from it, the only thing we can do is represent the community, like embrace the label, but try
Yeah.
to, just represent it in the light that we think it deserves to be represented, even
Mm-hmm.
despite its like little like quirks and like quote unquote flaws and like negative aspects. There's still like lots of like good in it, and because
Yeah.
there's some like negative aspects, it doesn't mean that those aspects also tie to you personally. Like you are in here for certain things that you believe are good, and you should want to represent those things. And that is something that I think that every furry should like strive for. And
Mm-hmm.
also I just want to say that I want for people to like try to embrace that term, just to not be afraid of it. Like
Yeah.
I understand the like skepticism about the term, but just kind of like, just I don't know, just bite your own hand, just like just get just get over it. I don't know.
Yeah, fuck it, man. Who cares? It's like, yeah,
Yeah,
that's the label.
exactly.
That's what I've had to do is like just go, yeah, yeah. I'm having fun. This is fun. I like these people. This is great. Who cares? That's
Yeah,
the extent of the worry I should have about it. But
exactly.
it's interesting with the burned furs because how you said it didn't solve anything. Because in the 1 year I've been on furry Twitter, I've seen like there's a controversy like every week. It seems like there's infighting all the time in the community. And I know very little about it. I don't really read into that stuff at all. But it seems like that's kind of just a nature of having a community this large, is that it is a loose term and there's a ton of people under this tent, and like that's just gonna kind of be part of it. It seems like that discourse has existed for a long time because people have different opinions on how it should be represented. And so I like what you said about how it just, yeah, wear the badge, like wear it with pride. Like who at the end of the day, who cares? Like
Yeah.
it's what you should do is, yeah, represent it as best as you can. And yeah, I think that's a really good mindset to have around it, you know?
Yeah. But I don't want to like enforce this onto people. I just want to like instead of like saying it's something that you should do,
Yeah.
I just want to say that it's not something that you have to do, but it's something that you like personally like should maybe like aspire to doing. Like just represent it for the values that you believe in. That's like the like ultimate goal, you could say, of
And
like
like
being, yeah.
uh
Continue.
but I also like I do love how unhinged it can get sometimes. Like that's the fun part too. Like it's great that there's such a range of people in this community, because I don't know, you have like teenagers who are like going through lots of change and like they're growing and they're maybe like anxious or depressed or they're working through these things, and like these characters can like help them out with that or give them a community of other people like around their age that they can talk to about this stuff. Or you have like artists who like to explore things through the metaphor of animals, or you have people who like to dress up and it's a sense of community. And then maybe you have people that like it for a sexual reason, and that's just as valid as all the others. And so you've got this amazing like display of all these different kinds of people from all over the world. And so I don't think like it's too big for anything like the burned furs to work, because
Yeah.
well, that's just the nature of it. Like it's such a huge community, even though it is still niche and not everybody knows about it. It's a pretty considerable force, especially on the internet, like the whole
Yeah.
furry community. And that's like, I don't know, I think that's beautiful as well. It's just really, it's just fun sometimes scrolling Twitter, and like because I'm in the furry community, it's all over like my For You page, which
Yeah.
is a shit show already. But yeah, there's so much going on, and I don't know about like 99% of it, and it's just kind of comforting, you know, that there is this bigger space. It almost feels like a physical space online, you know.
Yeah.
In any case, in any community, act the way you want it to be perceived. So like I think that's just like a good rule of thumb for most things. But yeah, I also agree like you can't tell people to do that, and there's no point in telling people to do that, because that's never
Yeah.
going to work.
Yeah.
Like it's just impossible.
Yeah, the only reason why I wanted to like specifically drive the point that I don't want to like enforce this idea is because it is something that I've like talked about in the past, like a lot with like other artists, and like this topic also came about, and I remember that I think in one instance, maybe even like two instances, like I was kind of like being low key labeled as some sort of like a free messiah. Like I want to like cleanse the community. Like I'm going to make it right, and I'm going to, I'm just going to cleanse the whole image.
I can fix him.
Yeah, exactly. But I really did not like. I just did not like when they like labeled me that way, because that just sounds really delusional. Like I don't want to be a goddamn free Jesus or free Messiah. Like I'm just in here like for my own interest, and I just wanna, I don't want to do quote unquote my part. I like this community. I like what it stands for. Like I believe a lot of things that are in the community. I believe a lot of things in here are like good things, and I want to represent those positive things. I want to like spread this image that I believe is like good. I just want to spread the good parts, right? That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and I think, I don't know, because I'm so new to this space, and I've only been here for a year, and I never identified as like part of it before that point. Like this community is like fucking awesome. Like it's the best online space I have ever been in. Like the people are welcoming, they're accepting. Sure, there's like drama, but that's everywhere. People disagree. that's everywhere. And there's like there's some weirdos and there's some assholes and some like predators, but that's everywhere. Like it's just like
Yeah,
any other community in a lot
exactly.
of ways. But because people dress up in animal outfits, it's a lot easier to point from an outsider's perspective and go, "Oh, look at them." Like there's this group of
Yeah,
people that are visibly like standing out from the crowd.
yeah,
And I don't know, it was like I was personally kind of surprised by like how wrong my preconceptions were of the space before, like after I got into it, you know, because it's yeah, people are just they're incredibly nice. It's awesome. So what I'm trying to say is I agree. Like I do really like what this space stands for, as much as you could say like a massive group of people stand for one thing. Like the the themes that run through it, I think, are
yeah,
really nice. And I think they do a lot more good than harm for sure. And they can really help people who can use these spaces to like grow as an individual or find a sense of
yeah,
community or work through some stuff that they probably couldn't work through if they weren't drawing those characters as like animal people, you know, in like in
yeah,
my case.
yeah. That's a very good way to put it, actually. But yeah, you know what? There's actually maybe there is one more thing I would like to ask. Actually, I would like to kind of follow up or circle back to the pretty much first question we discussed, which was the like furry terminology, and so we like kind of discussed the meaning of the word furry, but there's is also like a different term, like a different label, which is the furry fandom, and
Mm.
it is like a it is not the same term, like it is used in a different context,
Oh,
and it's
really?
something that I mean,
I because I don't know much about that, so I'm curious to learn more.
well, I was actually wondering like if like what is like your like perspective on like what like for you like what does just briefly like what does the furry fandom mean to you?
I don't have like a solid grip on the term, but if I were to guess, it sounds like it sounds like just like a further breakdown of like the general term. So it's like people that just consume the art or like the art. Because like I don't know, like it's not like every follower that I have has like the furry like profile picture, or has like has a character or something like that. Like maybe they just like the art. So I probably would guess that that is what that refers to, is people that don't really want the term, but they like the community and like they like what the community outputs. So it just sounds like furry light, pretty much.
Furry light.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, that's interesting. Oh, wow.
And that just sort of
I
seems like
didn't I
it's
didn't
just what
think about
people
it
are
this
comfortable
way.
with, you know? Like some people maybe aren't comfortable with the label, or they don't, or it's just not something they relate to, which I think like yeah, like my definition is now more like if you accept the label, you got it. Like that's all it is accepting it, or not accepting it. Maybe that's the wrong word, but choosing to label yourself that way. I think that's all that the requirement is.
It's like interesting that you just said that it's that for you like the furry fandom it means like a furry light because
I could be wrong. I don't know what they
no no no
think.
no
I don't
I
know.
just no that no that's the thing that there is like a given like specific like there isn't a literal definition on the internet there, or I mean if you Google furry fandom then it's going to spit up a definition for you, but it's not like a strictly given definition, and I think
Mm.
like your view on the term is still valid, and
Hmm.
like the same thing with the furry, like everyone has like a different look on it, and actually contra to what you said, like for me I used to like kind of associate like furry fandom with more like a more involved furry person basically.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so for me, like when I said furry, for me, furry is like for me just like the concept of like the anthropomorphic animals. That's just like a furry person is like a person that enjoys it, and like furry fandom, like I used to kind of view it like the inner furry circle, quote unquote. Like it's like someone who's like really
Oh,
involved, like someone who like really likes going to cons, and like knows all the like popular like furry people on the social media, and knows all the like
the
so-called
popufers.
popufers exactly. And that's exactly like what I thought of the fandom. Like, that's
Huh.
like the core of the like whole community. But
Interesting.
I like a lot
That
of
makes
like
a lot of sense.
I guess it makes
That
sense.
interpretation makes way more sense than furry light. Because yeah, I guess the fandom means you're into it. It's furry would be the more generic one, and then fandom would be the more specific.
Yeah. Yeah,
Interesting. Okay.
basically.
Yeah,
But
yeah, that
also
makes way more sense.
I've discussed like this specific like I've discussed this with like one other person, and their take was that the furry fandom is kind of basically interchangeable with the word furry, as
Hmm.
in it's like, I mean, in the real world, like some people really do use it interchangeably, like furry fandom or like the furries, quote unquote. They like mean
Hmm.
the same thing. Like that's the community. That's like the group of people who share that
Totally.
one interest, and that includes all the people, even those who are not exactly involved, and even those people that just like lurking around and like observing the content from a distance. But
Hmm.
in a way, that's still a fandom, I guess.
Totally. Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah, that's
No.
interesting. Because I didn't even because that was my perception of it was just the words were interchangeable. Like I didn't know people had different definitions for the two. It was like that's like saying like, "Oh, I like Marvel movies and I'm a fan of Marvel or I'm in the Marvel fandom." Like it feels like the same. It's just different levels
Yeah.
of the same thing. Hmm.
But well, okay. That now that it's interesting that you bring up like a Marvel fan as an example, because when you talk about like certain fandom, for example, like you said, Marvel fandom. I'm not sure if a Marvel fandom is a thing. Do you think Marvel fandom is a real thing?
No, I don't know. I think I was just sort of using that as like a random example. I don't think to the same extent or anything. Maybe there is, and I just don't
Maybe
know
there
about
is,
it.
or maybe uh, what could be like a real fandom? Maybe like Harry Potter fandom probably is a thing, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Oh
definitely is a
totally.
thing. Yeah, and so the thing I wanted to like follow up on is that with the like word fandom, like usually the thing that unites all of those people in, specifically in the example of Harry Potter fandom, is that is like the franchise, the Harry Potter franchise. Like if you
Hmm.
ask a uh, person from the Harry Potter fandom, like if you ask him to point at like what is their appeal, like what they like, they're all going to like point their fingers at the Harry Potter franchise, which is an intellectual property owned
Mm-hmm.
by Warner Brothers, I think, right?
Something like
So
that.
at the core of a fandom usually lies like some sort of specific media that everybody refers to. But the
Hmm.
difference with the furry fandom
Interesting.
is that there isn't that one single thing. There isn't that one single movie, literature, intellectual property
Yeah.
owned by a corporation that there isn't that one thing that everybody points to and says, this is it. This is what I'm here for. And that's just like I find it like really interesting and kind of like confusing about the word fandom, because then what are you like fan of?
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I've discussed this with a other fellow artist. Their name is Heathers, I think, and they basically said that the furry fandom, like the people in the fandom, are essentially like fans of each other.
Hmm.
And
That's an excellent way to put it.
yeah, I think that's
Yeah.
actually like a very interesting way to put it. And it's like it's just like it did not occur to me at all that I never thought even about that word fandom, because when you look at it from the context of like the other fandoms, then it's all pointing to one single source basically most of the time. But in here, there isn't one thing. It's just like it's the thing itself basically. Like we're fans
So cool.
of the fandom, like in a like
Yeah.
twisted way. It's like it's kind of like hard to like wrap my head around it. Oh my god,
I
man.
guess it
Oh,
is.
jeez.
It is that it's a community, because there's like,
Yeah.
I think that's the ticket, is that it's just so big, and I love that we're fans of each other. That's so true. Like, and I think that's why Twitter is so great for it, because you have like, you're just retweeting and stuff. So it's like the whole community is supported by people creating, and it gets like cycled around, and I don't know. It's kind of, that's really great. It's like the same thing as like, or not the same thing, but it's like YouTubers. It's like I like YouTube. I don't have one video where I'm like, yeah, this is the YouTube video, but I like the community on there and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And even there's like a billion different communities. Like, so yeah, that's interesting. 'Cause yeah, fandom, I suppose, usually does refer to a single thing, or like franchise. Yeah. That is a weird word to use for furries.
Or maybe I'm just not getting the definition of the word fandom exactly straight, and I'm just
Sounds right to me. It's just like, I'd never thought about like the definition of it. It's like, yeah, that does make sense. That like, if you're a fan of Harry Potter, it's like the books or the movies, you know?
yeah.
But even though there's more to it, like there's games and stuff, and I don't know much about Harry Potter, but I know there's a lot to it. And so,
Yeah.
but that still seems like you're a Harry Potter fan if you watched the movies as a kid, or if you liked them as an adult. But you don't have to be, just because you're a fan doesn't mean you know every single thing about it, but you're still tied back to that one piece of media
Yeah.
that everybody in the quote unquote fandom can relate to.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know. I'm fascinated by these definitions and that sort of thing when it comes to the community, but I think, yeah, community is still like the best way I'd use to describe it.
Yeah. I think so too. Furry fandom is just the community, and furries are part of the furry fandom. But I like, personally, I just like using the word like furry more than the furry fandom. I just like,
Yeah, I agree.
yeah.
It's easier to say as well. It's less of a mouthful.
Exactly. Well, it seems like our time is up. I'm gonna cut this discussion and this conversation here. Thank you very much for attending this first episode of Hi, this is the Furry Podcast. That's the name of the podcast, by the way. And it was great having you here. I enjoyed this conversation, and I hope that we can do this again in the future, because you're a great individual to talk with about this subject.
Hey man, well yeah, thank you. No, it was really fun, and yeah, it's just cool because it's nice to discuss these sort of things, and I feel like everyone has a very, or maybe not a very different, but everybody has minute differences in what they think about these definitions. So yeah, thank you for having me, man. It was great.
All right then. Well, in that case, see you around.